Hello and welcome to today's webinar with eLotus. We have been hosting educational courses at eLotus for over 2 decades and are proud to be your trusted source for premium CEU content with over 250 speakers, 900 courses, and 3,500 hours of continuing education. My name is Donna Chow and I'll be your host and your moderator for today's class. Today's webinar is part 2 of Amplify Your Acupuncture Results with Frequency Specific Microcurrent, also known as FSM, with Jimmy Yen. We had part 1 yesterday with Shannon Goosen, so we learned the basics with her, and today we will learn how to incorporate FSM into a TCM practice, specific history intake methods that quickly reveal key underlying issues, and how to choose and apply dual-channel microcurrent protocols with TCM treatments. This course covers fibromyalgia, conditions related to the peripheral nervous system, emotional trauma, PTSD, and case studies for special practices like fertility. The class time will be from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. We'll have 4 breaks, and Jimmy will let you know when those are, and we'll also have a lunch from 1 to 2 p.m. approximately. Before we begin, let's go over some important details about the chat room, questions for our instructor, and your CEU quiz. For the chat room, please set your chat preference to everyone, and we ask that you do this now so that everyone, whatever you're typing into the chat room, everyone can see what you're typing and be part of the conversation. For questions for Jimmy, please type them directly to the Q&A box instead of the chat room. That way it's all organized and he's able to see it. And for your quiz, it will be available the next working day, which is tomorrow on Monday. An email will be sent to you when it's ready. All right, guys, let's go ahead and start today's class. Our speaker today is Jimmy Yen, a seasoned acupuncturist and herbalist with over 10 years of experience. Jimmy started his private practice, Achieve Integrative Health, in 2007 and built it into one of the largest acupuncture clinics in the Austin metro area, where they are focused on quick, effective, and long-lasting results. Since 2018, Jimmy has been an eLotus speaker teaching classes on neuropathy, diabetes, gastroenterology, and practice management. I recommend the Gold Pass membership to watch all of his prior courses for free, receive limitless CEUs from hundreds of other courses, and get free herbs, of course. I'll share the link with you in just a bit, but for now, let's go ahead and begin today's class and welcome Jimmy Yen. Thank you, Jimmy, for a wonderful class, and thank you to our attendees for choosing eLotus as your CEU provider. If you enjoyed today's class, we'd love if you could share your experience on social media to help promote both our speaker and eLotus. As a reminder, the CEU quiz will be available tomorrow, and I will send you an email when it's ready. Thank you again for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you guys at our next webinar on February 2nd, 2023. Ashu Points for Neck and Shoulder Pain, Master Lessons of Over 50 Years with Kai Fung Tu. As the title implies, he is one of our elders who has been in practice for over 50 years, so he has many clinical pearls to share with us on the best acupuncture protocols, as well as the most effective Ashu Points for neck and shoulder pain. It's a course you definitely do not want to miss out on. So I'll see you guys then, and for now, have a great rest of your day. Bye!
All right, can you hear me? Perfect. Well, good morning, everybody, and happy Chinese or Lunar New Year if you celebrate it. My name is Jimmy Yen, and I will be introducing myself a little later. So quick Q&A. So I want you to type into the chat, how did you think about the class yesterday with Shannon? What did you think about the class yesterday with Shannon? Type into the chat. Very cool. Great info. Awesome. Loved it. Interesting. It's interesting. New acupuncturist here. Helpful. Awesome. Mind-blowing. Very good. Awesome. So everybody loves you, Shannon. So awesome. So for those of y'all who were here yesterday, you probably, noticed that Shannon had so much information to share with you, and she just ran out of time because we also had the 2 demo patients. Let me actually do another Q&A. How many did y'all like the demo patients? Did y'all actually like to see us live treating people? Yes. Yes. Okay. Great. Perfect. Guess what? We got a surprise for you. They're coming back today, okay? So we're gonna not only, a lot of the times with these demo patients, we treat them once and then they just go off and then we don't know what happened to them. So that's why we're bringing them back again today so they can give you some feedback and into, the microcurrent treatments. And then I will also go in a little more detail about what I did with acupuncture, and we will also treat the other gentleman with acupuncture using my QRA. So we will, so that's going to be in the afternoon. Okay. So we're going to change up the format just a little because we want to make sure we get you all the information and especially that Shannon has. And so what we're going to start off with is have Shannon finish up her presentation from yesterday, because there's a lot of crucial information that you can learn. And after she's done, then we'll switch back to me, and then I will go over my case studies. All right. So let's bring up Shannon.
Okay. Thank you, Jimmy. It's just a delight to work with you. And it is phenomenal how the staff has been here. So I got to meet Tina on the first night I was here, and Donna and Sam have been in the studio. I love being in the studio. I love being live. I love hosting live events. I'm glad some of you are very interested in seeing some of this happen live, because the energy that happens in a room when all of the practitioners come together and we share is phenomenal. And I am a lifelong learner, and some of you probably figured that out yesterday. I am always looking for what is the next thing that I can do that will make a change in my practice. Now, I understand that frequency specific microcurrent is not going to be for everybody for a variety of reasons. And understanding that, when I am presenting and teaching, one of the things that I did is like, what can I do as a practitioner and an instructor that even when I'm talking about using a device or any modality for that matter, how can I share information with you that you can use regardless of what you're doing? And that was really my great hope for what we did yesterday, that anyone would be able to take the information from yesterday and say, oh, I have a pearl. I have something that I can apply, even if I'm not doing FSM, even if I don't do devices, even if the only thing I'm going to do is acupuncture, even if the only thing I'm going to do is herbs, I now have a way to have these pearls that I got yesterday. And they're the pearls that get missed from the fields that you rely on to give you that information. And now you don't have to rely on them. You have that information and you can apply it. You can think about the central nervous system differently. You can think about concussion differently. You can think about fibromyalgia differently. And you can ask more questions and do inquiry with your patients. So I'm delighted that you enjoyed what we did yesterday. I'm hoping that you grabbed pearls here and there as it applies to your practice. And maybe some of you got just a bunch of information that finally went, wait a minute, all of this fits together. It's a string of pearls from all of these different fields. And now I understand what is happening and how it all fits together. So remember, in ancient Chinese medicine and the older traditions, you didn't get to be a specialist until you were a generalist. The generalist was the specialist, and that was the person that knew so much about every single area of human health, vitality, and living a full life. And so this is where I want to just bring as much of that to you as possible. So I appreciate your interest, and I am now going to finish the cliffhanger of what happened yesterday. And it was so perfect that it unfolded with our people that were our demonstration patients yesterday, because they both brought up the emotional things that had happened in their life and how it had impacted the injuries that they had and how they were going forward. So with that, I'm going to remind you that we were talking about these things that happen to the central nervous system and concussion, people getting neck injuries, people having spinal cord pain, nerve pain, joint pain, bilateral hip pain, and degeneration. And then there's this piece to it. It's like, who is that person that has it? Because that's really, really at the core and probably the most important missing piece of how we take care of patients collectively, and certainly in allopathic medicine. So when I was working with, well, and I still am, the military, and I started presenting this information, I was a little hesitant because there was pushback about talking about emotions and psychological conditions. And there was really a skewed belief. It's like, oh, they're just crazy. And very, very few people, in my opinion, are crazy. I think what is happening when we see all these situations of psychological distress and emotional distress and really, really uncontrolled emotional behavior and outbursts, and people going into deep depression and people not being able to function optimally in their daily life, that to me is not a psychiatric diagnosis. Most of those people are having a completely normal reaction to abnormal human events in their life. And so what the responses that we're seeing and what our patients are going through, completely normal based on the abnormal way that society has cultured parenting and taking care of children, and what we have come to consider normal, abnormal normal. So let's dive in and talk about that a little bit as the underpinnings for what has happened to most of us if we have had these events happen early in life. We talked at the very end about the limbic system hijacking. It's really the amygdala that gets hijacked within the limbic system, but the limbic system also includes your hippocampus, and the hippocampus has to do with memory. And interestingly, if you have been exposed to enough trauma, the hippocampus can shrink and it affects your cognitive abilities. So the most important overlooked issue when it comes to distress that people have in later life and adulthood is a history of ACEs. And ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. It has actually been written about extensively for the last 20 years. And unfortunately, it still hasn't made it into, I'm going to just call it mainstream medicine. I've been trying to get the military to be more active about using it in the clinics for which I have influence. And I tell everybody about this everywhere. And that is because we have the data and we have the research. And it's shocking to me in an environment that says evidence-based medicine that they are not bringing in the evidence. And the reason that I think that might be happening is there's so many people that have adverse childhood experiences. The practitioners are like, oop, therefore, by the grace of God, go I. And that is, I don't want to deal with my own issues, so I'm not going to bring it up with my patients, and I don't want to open up a can of worms. So anybody that has had any of this emotional trauma, and it's extreme trauma, fear, people that have been in a situation where they have been scared to death. Now, we're just coming out of something where people were, because of what was happening with the news and the misinformation and information constantly changing and people being told these terrible things that would happen if you do X, Y, and Z, we put an entire planet that was aware of this into a situation where they could be scared to death, because death was what was being propagated for everyone. So be thinking about that right now, that we all have this shared experience that we went through. And then failure to feel safe. Well, right now for the last 2 years, 3 years, yeah, we have been put in a situation where we have been told we are not safe unless we lock ourselves in a room by ourselves and no one comes near us. Well, that's completely diametrically opposed to healthy human beings need to be in a social setting. So now you have two opposing needs in order to feel safe: belonging within a society, and if you want to feel safe, you have to be alone. So I'm bringing this out into the open and putting words to what has happened collectively, because sometimes people don't know, what is it that I'm feeling that has happened to me? To be human is to have emotions, and to be human and thrive requires that we're in community. When we are expelled from community for any reason or made to be an outsider, it is very, very bad for our health. And the people that thrive and have the best longevity have community, and they have a sense of belonging. So just sit with that for a minute and think about what has happened collectively to everyone that was part of this. So you may see with your patients some kind of unreasonable behavior, or their reactions are far beyond what just happened, what they heard, what was said, just coming into the clinic. It's a mismatch. And this is because when people have any of this running in the background, the special senses, remember we talked about that in the cranial nerves, especially the ones that emanate from the medulla. So we're thinking, the vagus nerve and hearing and speech and facial expression. And then the eyes will do something where we hone in and dilate in order to look for the threat. We don't get a vote. Our limbic system evolved, and it was designed to keep you alive. And it was designed for threats that were very, very real, that had to deal with, you will die if you're not paying attention to what's going on. We don't have those threats anymore, but we still have a limbic system that is operating the same way that it did. So now the threats of the 21st century and what's happened in the last 2 decades, it really puts people at risk because their senses get activated. And so now they're just looking for something bad. They are just assuming out there something bad is going to happen. And so something very benign might have been said in a clinic, in a treatment room, out when people are socializing, and people take it as negative, or they'll get very, very defensive. And this is because those special senses and the amygdala are alerted, and they're looking for the threat. In order to have good decision making, you have to have top-down control, which means your prefrontal cortex has to be on board. The way that we were designed is that if your amygdala gets activated by any perceived threat, 5 seconds, it's going to suppress your prefrontal cortex. And if you have had a lifetime, okay, so think about Jeff yesterday, adverse childhood experiences. He was in a very violent home. He had substance abuse. He did not feel safe in his home. He was always trying to flee. There are situations where people have this overactivated, and they basically go off the impulse of what the amygdala is saying to do, rather than having the prefrontal cortex come on board to give good decision making. So when you see people acting very impulsively, or all of those times in your life where you did something very impulsively and it's like, why did I do that? Why did I do that again? It is because if the amygdala gets triggered by something, okay, and it's something you hear, something you smell, something you see, okay, we saw that yesterday, and you don't get a vote. It happens, you don't get a vote, and your prefrontal cortex can't come online. People don't know what to do until they know this is what happens. And once they know this is what happens, they can say, oh, I'm triggered. I just need to sit still and not do anything and wait for my prefrontal cortex to come back. This is one of the reasons treating the brain is so important. So I think you can probably see this funny t-shirt, which is my amygdala could beat up your prefrontal cortex. And for anybody that has these issues, it does. And if you've ever been in a grocery store or anywhere where there's a toddler or a young kid and they want something right now and they see the candy bar, they want it right now, that is the amygdala saying, I need to do this. I want this right now. I have to have it. And when they can't have it, they have a complete meltdown and temper tantrum. Well, I'm here to tell you this actually happens in boardrooms and other places with grown people that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, because their amygdala that is wanting something is beating up the prefrontal cortex, and they don't have that top-down control. So guess what? With frequency specific microcurrent, we have brain frequencies and we have emotion frequencies, and we have protocols for PTSD when this has happened to people, where we can start giving people back their sovereignty, when they can actually have ways to start improving and getting control once they understand what has happened. So it really, really helps to get your patient's trauma history. And you watched me do that yesterday with both of our demo patients. And you heard from Jeff, his was pretty challenging. And then when he finally, you know, as an adult had that serious injury to his hand, it was catastrophic for him and led to PTSD. So this is why it's like, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? We want to learn to recognize what is going on with our patients, and then early on use these emotional protocols in treatment. I gave you the case yesterday of the young lady with PTSD who was coming in for pain, which this is what our patients are going to do. And very, very early on, I was using emotional protocols in order to help her. So if you're not ready to ask the questions and you're using frequency specific microcurrent, it's okay, because you can start by dealing with that standard concussion protocol, the nervous system reset, which addresses what happened to people from all of those traumas. So this is a beautiful, beautiful rendition of the vagus nerve. And it is to remind you that that nerve is everywhere. It is everywhere. It's brain down to all of your viscera and your squishy bits. And it's a two-way street. It's from your squishy bits and viscera, lungs, heart, and it goes up and tells your brain. This is the nerve that is communicating, hey, everything okay down there? Yeah, we're good. Okay, everything is good up here also. You can engage with community. But guess what? If you have an infection and you get sick, one of the reasons that people withdraw and want to go into, I call it the cave, is because they are getting information to their brain that the immune system is saying, ooh, we have a problem here. And it actually triggers things in your brain that make you want to withdraw. Your microbiome is having a conversation with your vagus nerve also. And so it's telling the vagus nerve what's going on. So remember, we have this two-way street with communication. There is no separation between the brain and the body, and that's because we have a vagus nerve that has afferent and efferent fibers. So one of the ways that you can evaluate whether someone has good vagal tone is just using a tongue depressor. And super, super easy to do. You just depress the tongue so that you can see the uvula, and then you have the patient go, and then when they do that, you can see which direction the uvula is going to. The uvula will always point to the direction for the side that is working, because that is the muscle that has tone, or it raises up in the center and both sides are working. So remember, the cranial nerve for the vagus, which is 10, is also the motor power to the back of your throat, which lifts the uvula. And so this is how we can start assessing what is happening with speech, facial expression, and how well the vagus tone is. So I recommend testing everybody for that and taking a look. You can use the flashlight on your phone, or you can use a light that we use to look at the pupils in the eyes. So I talked about the number one issue that we have is adverse childhood experiences. I'm just going to give you the history on how that questionnaire came out. So it turns out at Kaiser Permanente, okay, so in our backyard here in California, Dr. Folletti was running a weight loss clinic that was very, very successful in the 1980s, and they were getting great results. The challenge is he had all of these people dropping out and like in record speed, gaining back all of their weight. Fortunately, as a very, very curious man, he wanted to know what had happened and why these people who had transformed their bodies, their weight, their health, why it changed. So he actually called up these patients. There's 286 of them, and he asked them to come back, and then he interviewed them. Well, lo and behold, when he interviewed them, it turns out that every single one of them had suffered childhood trauma. And in that, he realized that the weight was a protective mechanism against engagement and fear, and actually anyone being attracted. Now, this happened to men and women. More and more men are coming forward about the sexual trauma that they experienced when they were young, which is really, really helpful. So it's men and women, but predominantly women. So later on, what he did is he teamed up with Dr. Anda, who was at the CDC, and then they actually put together this study through Kaiser Permanente. And what they did during this study in San Diego is they enrolled nearly 18,000 people. So everybody that walked through the door that said yes, it was consecutive. They just, enter these people into the study. And so think about this, Kaiser Permanente, these people all have insurance. You are dealing with people that it's us. They're employed, they're college educated, they have jobs, they have insurance, they don't have the security issues that we think of when there's problems like this. It was not an issue of poverty, lack, or non-access. So now you've got these people coming in, and basically you had an average age of 57, and they came up with 10 questions in 3 categories, and it had to do about abuse, neglect, violence, mental illness, and incarceration. And they were able to find out what was actually going on with these average employed, college educated, middle-aged people. Here's what happened when they did that study. So, and this is the one that was repeated back between 2011 and 2014. And this was multi-study states. So there was 23 states involved in this study. And they found out 38% was the number of people that have no ACEs. 38%. 38% of the population. Everybody else has experienced some kind of adverse childhood experience. And then what was so shocking to me is that you've got 25% of the population has had 3 or more ACEs. Every time they've done this study, it is reproducible that we're seeing a high part of the population that has experienced ACEs, adverse childhood experience. And it is not benign, because when they then checked what happened to people, it turns out that the top 10 chronic diseases that we have patients come in with to our clinics when they have a Western diagnosis, they had ACEs. So there is a correlation between having ACEs and having some kind of chronic problem later in life. So this is going to be substance abuse. This is going to be drug abuse. If you've had 5 or more ACEs, there is a 5,000 time likelihood that you are going to use heroin. People end up with obesity, they end up with chronic pain, they end up on workers' comp, they end up with injuries, they end up with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, they end up with COPD. Think about that. We already know where these top 10 diseases come from, okay? And it is because what happened when you were a child. And 0 to 7 is a really, really important window for me, but they went all the way up to 17 years old with this. So now you can see that we really actually have to know what happened to the person that has these issues, because they are more likely to engage in risky behavior. They are more likely to be going for substances or things that will try to make them feel better. And I'm just going to tell you that yesterday, some of you probably went, oh my gosh, did she just say that? Exercise dependence. You've had some of these patients. Heroin. They're both addictions. All addiction is the same to me. And I don't assign anything punitive, because the line is not, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? We are going to punish you. It's, what happened to you that this is what you're doing? Exercise dependence and workaholics, we praise. But guess what? It's still in the addiction category because of what happened to people. So for me, it's all the same. It's just some have worse consequences. Now, I'm going to tell you with all of my, because remember, I work with a lot of athletes, my clients that are exercise dependent, when they get hurt and they can't exercise, they're batshit crazy. They cannot cope with their lives if they can't exercise in the way they're accustomed. That is their drug. So this is where they become just as disabled in society as someone who is using heroin. So remember, I told you how high that ACE score is on someone who is at high risk for being a heroin abuser. And the reason for that is, guess how people feel when they use heroin? The immediate feeling that someone has is they belong. And what do you think the one thing they don't feel if they've grown up in a family where they've got an ACE score that is that high? No belonging, no community, no being seen. So what do you think happens when you are phylogenetically programmed to need to belong, and you never got it as a child, and you take a drug, and all of a sudden you feel that feeling, I belong? Well, guess what? We're phylogenetically programmed to go after that feeling and belong in a community. So this is why I say to you, there is a reason that everybody uses the substance that they use when they use it. And it's telling you information about them. It's not punitive when it comes out of me. It's information and helps to inform on how I can best serve that patient. And everything that I do from a standpoint of education, learning, and seeking what else can I do is about giving people every opportunity to heal as much as they can for what has ever happened while they're on planet Earth, so that they can give their gifts. Remember our little 7, 8-year-old girl that was disabled in a wheelchair? I had a tool and she got her life back. And then she got to share her gifts with people on Playground Earth. So that is always my goal. It's not punitive, and we all know that it did not work to be punitive for why people were doing drugs. So here's the research. I wanted to give you plenty of time to look at this. And it's the lifespan of what happens with ACEs. This has been very, very well researched, which is why I do not understand that every single pediatrician, every single internal medicine family practice in the military, we are not aggressively addressing what has happened to people so we can intervene. So as they age, they're aging with vitality. So we want to have an active, fabulous lifespan. What's the point in living out the end of your life disabled and in a nursing home? There is a way that we can give people their vitality back. So all you need is an ACE score of 2 or 3 in order to have chronic pain. It's a dose relationship. The more ACEs, the more likelihood someone is going to have a problem. And look at this, 80% of youth that have chronic pain right now, they have an ACE score. So this is one of the ways. Remember, I was talking about the neck, and I can look at the neck, and I know all these different signs of what's going on with people. I can basically tell you what someone's ACE score is based on the kind of complaints they have. I already know that it's there. I already know something happened, and that's because these scores have been repeated. We have the data. So if you have a greater than 3 ACE score, you're going to have a dramatic increase in functional impairment, anxiety, depression, and fear of pain. Okay, so we basically told people that there was fear avoidance behavior. You know, psychology and psychiatrists give everything a name, and then the name becomes a diagnosis. It's ridiculous, in my opinion. And I would tell any psychiatrist that, because I also know how they came up with the DSM, which is pretty ridiculous. People are having a normal response to something very, very abnormal that happened to them. And this is how we need to start reframing this. So just look at this graphic right here, okay? Because remember, we're talking about brain development, and this is why this is so important, and I'm all about the central nervous system. You have a window of time that's really, really important, 0 to 7, with brain development, because you are basically learning about your social environment and what the rules are, and you are a giant sponge. When you put a brain of a child in a bad environment and a dangerous environment and a violent environment and a chaotic environment, it changes the way the brain gets wired, and it's permanent. And so the best that we can do is educate people and then give them new behaviors to run alongside and run a different program. But the wiring is basically always there. So we have these critical and sensitive development periods. And once you have adverse childhood experiences, and the more categories, the greater the impact on all of these terrible things that can happen, it actually changes the electrical, chemical, and cellular mass of the brain. The brain is changed. And then you're hardwired into the biology of how your brain is going to work, because you have to adapt. Remember yesterday I was talking adapt. We are adapting from the time we are in utero. We are adapting to the environment. If we didn't adapt, we would all die. It's adapt or die as far as I'm concerned. So this is where we end up with these chronic diseases, psychiatric disorders, impaired cognition, work school issues. These are your kids, you know, in trouble in school, bullying, bad grades, can't pay attention, sleep deprived, brain not focusing, ADD. And then we have a high likelihood of obesity, alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, risky sex, and then crime, poverty, and intergenerational transmission and disparity. So it's like the gift that keeps giving. And then, unfortunately, what we know now with epigenetics is once all of this happens and you get triggered, it changes gene expression. And this is where we have this huge opportunity to change what is happening in the brain with the modalities that we use and change the way the genes express. And I hope Jimmy will talk about mindset this afternoon, because nothing, and this morning and afternoon, mindset is so important, and what we put in our mind is so important. So anybody that I have that has really got a high ACE score, especially, or is already high risk for amygdala activation, don't watch the news. do not watch the news. It is geared towards specifically activating it and making you feel fearful. And it's because they know we're already phylogenetically designed for that. So here's the 2 questionnaires. You can go online and download these. And the first one is the medical symptom questionnaire. This is a great, simple, numerical way to keep track of what people's complaints and systems are in their systems as they are going through treatment with you. So this is from the Functional Medicine Institute. This is one of the trainings that I went through early on in my career to actually understand systems-based medicine and ground up and upstream down for what is happening and look at everything from a cohesive standpoint. The other one is the actual ACE questionnaire. The original one is 10 questions, and we already talked about the categories. You don't necessarily need to know how people answered the questionnaire. You just need the number. And you can download this off the internet also. The military actually has one that goes up to 15 questions, and that's because people in the military can be exposed to things that we wouldn't normally see in our environment. And there's some really, really bad things that can happen in the military that we wouldn't normally be exposed to. There's some others that have added some questions because now our biggest 21st century issue for kids is bullying, and there's some other things that can happen. So this is the one that has been standardized, though. So you saw me do this yesterday, except for one, because we went right into what is the worst thing that happened to you. So the first one is, did you have pain when you were a child? Any pain when you were a child? And the reason that I asked that is because we already have the data, right? And the data says that if you had pain as a child, 80% likelihood that you have got ACEs, right? So just by yes or no with that, I already have a data point really fast. I don't have to ask a lot of questions, were your mom and dad mean to you when you were a kid? I don't have to ask anything personal on that first visit. I can ask this benign question that gives me so much information. And then I'm going to find out if they had stomach pains, if they had migraines, if they had headaches, if they had to miss school, if they were sick a lot. Gives me a lot of information. And then the second one is, saw me do it. So what's the worst thing that ever happened to you? And I ask it that benign and simply. It's an unloaded question and it's indirect. And then remember, the brain likes contrast. Remember when we were doing the frequency response test and I had Jimmy and Donna checking it with me? I kept on pausing the device and turning it back on, pausing the device and turn it back on. So the brain had the contrast. Everything that you do, the brain likes contrast and the brain likes to figure something out. The way that it figures something out is you have to give it a direct question. If you ask someone, did this ever happen to you? They can immediately just say, no, nope. And they usually do. It's like, did you ever had any concussions? No, never had a concussion. And then you find out they broke their nose. They got hit by a softball. Oh yeah, I forgot roller skating, ice skating. I fell on the ice and yeah, I guess I was knocked out, but they just forget it. Whereas if you say, what is the worst thing that happened to you? And you saw Jeff do this for us. It's brain's going through all the catalogs very, very quickly, neurons firing everywhere, and it is looking for, ooh, what was the worst thing? It wants to give you the right answer. So they'll either come right out with it, or what they're going to do is say, well, emotional or physical. And as soon as someone says emotional or physical, they've already told you it's both, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have had to ask. You know it's both. So now you get to get them out of the hot seat and you just say, well, either one, which one do you think it is? If they tell you the physical one, it usually means they're not ready to talk about the emotional one. If they tell you the emotional one, they are so glad you asked and they are so glad someone cares enough to start working through it with them. It allows you to get instantaneously in rapport with people because you are asking questions about what happened in their life that no one has ever asked, starting with the ones that's like, how many times did you hit your head? And that's one of the ways that I say it, because most people, for one reason or another, in childhood or as an adult, they've hit their head. So I don't say, did you ever? How many times? Because I could say 0, right? But if I ask them how many times, again, the brain has to go through that catalog. Well, how many times have you hit your head? People really do want to give you the right answer if you ask the question in a way that prompts them giving you the answer that provides the most information. So remember those 2 questions. It's an easy way in your interview to get information really, really quickly. So we're to close for all of this on the didactic for just giving you the deep dive on some of the things we can do with frequency specific microcurrent. And I gave you probably the biggest categories where you just have a filing cabinet in your brain now for being able to think about some things that maybe you haven't. And of course, you can take that with you everywhere in your practice, whether you're using frequency specific microcurrent or not. It's my preference to use it. I would never not use FSM now because of how quickly I can modulate the central nervous system. And it turns out that this is driving the bus for everything. And you heard Victoria yesterday when she said, oh, yes, I believe that my brain can solve all of this. And that's very true. So remember with your patients, as we went through this, they're allowed to have more than one thing wrong. And they usually do. My big line is patients are allowed to have more than one thing wrong. And that came out of the unfortunate situation with allopathic medicine, where a patient walks in, it's like, oh gosh, I'm here for my wrist today, but I also have this shoulder problem and this thing in my neck. Oh, no. You've got to pick one. You can only have one problem. And then when you leave, you can make another appointment and we'll talk about the other one. Well, if the doctor actually understood what was going on, likely he would know it was probably coming from the neck and would have just said, we can only do one thing. I think we should investigate your neck first, even though you're here for wrist pain. Does that make sense when I say that? So patients usually have more than one thing wrong. And where they're feeling the pain, wrist pain, is not typically where it's coming from. And then even with the other issues in the body, remember, I'm thinking about the brain first and the central nervous system. When Jeff got up yesterday, he wasn't mic'd and he was moving around. And remember, I like, Jeff, where's your pain? And I could already see that he had this neck thing going on and he probably had fibromyalgia, which he's like, yeah, I've got pain everywhere. You heard him say it. When he left last night, his pain was a 0. And what was most fascinating to me is Victoria was shocked when he said that, like he had never said that before. So it'll be interesting to see how long that lasted when he comes in. So remember, we want to be addressing that central nervous system and peripheral nervous system first as the perpetuators of patients' persistent pain. And remember, within that central nervous system is the limbic system. And it could have been those things that happened in early childhood, the adverse childhood experiences, coupled by other very, very traumatic things that happen later in life. So when we use FSM, we have just this great opportunity to push our abilities, which is exactly what happened for me, because now all of a sudden, my impossible cases, it's like, you know what, there's probably an answer for this if I investigate it and I can actually see what happens with these frequencies. So we want to just go back and it's like, upstream. I can ask the question and I bet I can deal with this. And then the other thing, I brought it up several times, stabilization. Getting people's stabilizers on and starting with that transverse abdominis and getting all of the other, I call them movers, my mover stabilizer model. And we want to get stabilizers on so movers can move the body. And that's when people in their body become instantaneously more functional and staying out of pain is possible for them because they can go back and use their bodies the way they were phylogenetically designed, right? So I want to thank all of you for participating. I so appreciate all of the questions and comments that came in. It was just terrific to be able to interact. And you've heard me say it over and over again. It's just been amazing to work with the staff here. And then also Jimmy for actually saying, hey, let's do this together. I would love to present and giving me the opportunity to introduce this information. So here is my contact information. My email is shannon@myofascial.net. My training site for online training, I have the full foundations for microcurrent at that website. I have a neurology class. I have the post-concussion syndrome class. There's some other classes that are there. And that is frequenciesthatmend, all one word.com. So www. It's actually courses, COURSES, courses.frequenciesthatmend.com, and we'll bring that up for you also. And at the very end, you have my bibliography, or not my bibliography, my bio, and I cited everything during the presentation. So thank you all very much. We're going to take just a minute to switch over. And the very, very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come closer to the camera here. Remember, people were, it's like, okay, what minerals do you put in? What do you use, Shannon? What do you use? And so these are my two favorite right here. So this is Elemental. Okay, LMNT, Elemental. And this is the electrolyte mix that has the sodium, potassium, and magnesium in the perfect balance that your body needs. I sound like a commercial, don't I? This is why I usually avoid this stuff. But this is what I use. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is what you would want to use, but this is what the athletes use also. This is what people do after they do sauna, if they've been sweating a lot, but it is a fantastic way to get these minerals in balance. And then the other one that I travel with, because I travel so much, is I have a electrolyte pack that is also a multivitamin, and it has vitamin C. I'm on planes a lot. This is a super, super easy way for me to make a delicious beverage. See, I do sound like a commercial. It's a delicious beverage, and it's fizzy, and it's so good for you. So these are the two that I absolutely love and always have in my purse. So we're going to just take a short break here so that Jimmy can get the microphone on, and we're going to switch over. Thank you so much. And we'll be back in a minute.